We got Gators breakdown here. We know we're business.
Gators breakdown, because there's never a dull moment in Gator Nation.
The Gators Breakdown podcast is ready to go. I'm your host, David Waters. You can find me on social media at GatorDave_SEC. And it is time to get back into recruiting. And to help me do all that, Cory Bender from Gators Online joining me right here on Gators Breakdown Deep Dive Recruiting. Cory, I know been busy coming off the heels of spring and spring practice and the orange and blue game. We know summer is always busy, so thank you for carving out some time to hop on Gators Breakdown right here.
No, always. Thanks for having me on, Dave. I always appreciate it, man. Thank you so much.
Yeah, like I said, plenty to get into. Only 2 commits in the class right now for Florida. So, a lot of room for this Gator class to grow in the coming months and before, that early signing day in December. But, Cory, what you guys got going on at Gators Online right now? The new edition of Blake Alderman last week.
Yeah, no, everything's going good, man. So, yeah, we're running a promo right now, $1 for the first 3 months. Same old stuff, man. We're trying to pump out a lot of recruiting content. We're going to be getting on the road here pretty soon as well. Keith will be doing recruiting too. I know he'll be kind of bouncing back and forth between recruiting and team coverage. But, yeah, man, a lot of buzz over at Gators Online, a lot of scoop, a lot of intel. So, definitely we always say this when we put out promos. It's obviously the best time to join. But I think right now we've been catching fire, a lot of good content coming out. And, yeah, we'll be live at some schools here pretty soon, too, kind of expanding our coverage even more. But I think more importantly, obviously, official visit season, like you said, Dave, that's approaching. And 3 massive recruiting weekends on tap for Florida. And they'll also have the Grill in the Ville cookout later in June as well. So it's going to be a massive June, and we're kind of leading into that and providing all the coverage leading into those weekends.
Yeah, we'll get into some of those topics right there in just a second. But everybody hit that like button. Comment right here. Get you good recruiting news. Subscribe right here on Gators Breakdown if you haven't done so yet. But give us a big old help and hit that like button right here on YouTube. So, hey, Cory, if you don't mind, let's go transfer portal a bit before we turn the page to 2026. You reported yesterday right there on Gators Online. The number 1 linebacker in the portal right now, Andrew Simpson from Boise State, has been in communication with Florida. And also some news, Miami safety Zaquan Patterson, he scheduled his official visit to Florida for Wednesday. Florida lost safety Gregory Smith to the portal last week, so we could, you can see a need in that regard at the safety spot. But the need at linebacker is a little less. But Simpson would bring some experience from 3 seasons with the Broncos.
Yeah, Simpson's interesting. I think, like you said, Dave, you look at the linebacker room. I mean, to me, it's stacked. I mean, there's a lot of youth. Obviously a lot of talent in that room. When you kind of look, Pup Howard, he's kind of the face of that room. Aaron Childs, I mean, then obviously you have Miles Graham. I mean, the list goes on and on. And Ty Jackson obviously made a big statement in the orange and blue game as a true freshman after missing all of his senior year, which makes it even that much more impressive. So you kind of look at the room and you're wondering why. But kind of when you look at Simpson, I think he's one of those guys. He got All-American honors a season ago. Before last season, I should say. And, a guy that I think when you look at him overall, his productivity, his experience, I think he's one of those guys, if he shows any interest, you kind of take a look at him. He only makes your linebacker room better. As of right now, it's nothing too serious. He did, I mean, over right now, I think over 25 to 30 schools have reached out, and he was at North Carolina today. We'll see if it leads into a visit. I've been told nothing's been scheduled to this point. But Florida's definitely kind of kicking tires, kind of seeing what his schedule is. I know USC. He's a California kid, so you got to look at USC as well. He went to St. Bosco, a powerhouse program on the West Coast, about 30 minutes away from the Trojans campus. So that's something to look into. North Carolina, like I said, got on campus today. But we'll see. Nothing too much. I think it's just the beginning stages, but we'll see if it kind of leads into a visit. And like you said, Patterson, I think that's more the realistic target. Like you said with Gregory Smith going to the portal, Florida could use another safety. I thought even before Gregory ran to the portal, I think they probably could have. We always thought maybe linebacker or edge or some of these positions, interior defensive line, there's a few positions we could see Florida adding some depth to. And now with Gregory Smith gone, I think it just makes that much more sense. Florida wasn't too involved with him out of high school. He's a kid out of South Florida, though, Shamadan Prep out down in Hollywood. So we'll see where it goes. Like you said, tomorrow, like you said, Dave, the official visit starts. And I think right now in the transfer portal is different than obviously high school. High school, you see kids schedule 5 to 7 OVs. But when it comes to the portal, kids move quick. And if you get an OV schedule from a top portal kid, that's a bigger development than when a kid schedules one at the high school level. So it'll definitely be something to monitor.
Yeah, because these guys know the game right now. So in transfer portal talk, it's like there is interest if they're taking visits, and I don't think it's just look, because we know we're not going to put our head in the sand. We know there's some communication been going on if you get this far with it. So certainly the interest is real on both sides with this official visit coming up.
Yeah, and I think, too, when you look at Florida, you'll even track – I mean, I know you do the same thing. You track their follows on social media, see some of these coaches are following. And I reached out to quite a few kids that have got followed by Florida staff in recent weeks. And some of them have said, I haven't heard from Florida. I know they follow me, but I haven't spoken with them. So Florida's pretty selective with who they actually reach out to as well. They might follow just to kind of track their recruitment and see what pops up. But when Florida makes contact, they usually ask for the transcripts, and that's the first big step. And the fact that obviously Florida got an OV scheduled that quick with Patterson, that's notable. And like you said, Dave, there's not much messing around the portal. Maybe if you're a really coveted kid that has, like you said, like a Simpson, a kid that has all these schools, you can kind of take your time and be more selective. But when a kid sets an OV pretty quick, to me, the vibe I get is, hey, they're not messing around. The recruiting pitches, they just want to get to business, see how I can fit. They've been through recruiting before. Let's go build relationships to see how I can fit in your program. So I think that says a lot.
All right, that's good for transfer portal talk. Let's get to the class of 2026. Only 2 commits right now, as we said, Corey, with 4-star Izayia Williams at linebacker, 4-star quarterback Will Griffin. Of course, a recent decommit we'll get into as well. But 2 commitments right now, and I know we're about to hit May. We know the summer months are busy. We'll get into some, maybe concerns and likes about and good trends for this class, but with only 2 commits heading into May right now, any concern with just that number of 2?
I mean, I wouldn't say it's a huge concern. I mean, you would think, being the University of Florida, you would have maybe a few more at this time. I mean, I think if someone said, hey, do you have 5? If you have 5 commitments, it's still not a big amount. But it's also shows what type of program the type of players Florida's recruiting. They might Will Griffin had the Florida connections. They got him in the boat early on. So that's a school he wanted to go to. But a lot of these other schools, a lot of these other prospects, I should say, that they're getting involved with, they're high major kids that are really relying on the OVs to really kind of separate the one school from the rest of the pack. And with this NIL era, that's kind of where it kind of heats up. By the end of summer, a lot of these kids like to come off the board, and some of them come off the board, but they still take some visits in the fall, but they kind of want to make that commitment. So, yeah, I mean, there's a little bit concern as far as, only 2 commitments, but Florida's also in a good spot with a number of kids. And I think by the end of summer, we'll see that number expand significantly. OV-wise, there's over 30 kids scheduled, around 30, to be coming in over a three-week span. And some of those kids, have Florida near the very top. They just want to obviously see what else is out there and kind of compare, the pros and cons with these schools. So it could be – I mean, you probably hope to have more, maybe 3 to 5, probably 5 range. But at the same time, we saw how Florida finished last cycle, man. I mean, the way they finished the season, I haven't seen – I mean, Dave, I know you've been covering recruiting for a long time too. I haven't seen a finish like that with a recruiting class in some time, how hot they got. Once they announced that Napier was coming back, it just shows the belief they all had in Napier too. It was kind of, hey, I like Florida, but is the coach going to be there? And then once they found out that Napier was coming back, you just saw the wheels really start going in motion. Florida started winning, and you saw a lot of high major kids jump on board. I think this year is going to be the same type of thing as far as you'll see more kids jump on board a little bit sooner. I think they saw enough last year. There's a lot of excitement with DJ Lagway. And I think after some of these OVs this summer, some kids even in the end of May, we have some kids that are announcing before OVs. I think we'll see that number kind of expand quite a bit.
Yeah, I think that's the only surprise for me was because of that big finish at the end, maybe some of these 26 kids would jump in earlier. But, I think, I don't think it's cause for concern, but it is noticeable with the way you were able to finish last class, but that really didn't translate to a fast start for this class. Now, don't get me wrong. You've had decommitments in this class, too. Jalen Waters decommits, Devin Jackson. So you have had more commitments. But you've had some decommitments in there too, so that's
tough. I think, like you said, I think noticeable is probably the best word for it. Concerned a little bit, but I think it's definitely noticeable. And I think overall too, I think Florida by the official visits, I think it'll pick up.
Cory, another great time to get you here because there's been some news on the recruiting in the form of what was once a big day in high school and especially at Florida, Friday Night Lights. And then we get Grill in the Ville as well. So it looks like they'll be happening in the same weekend. You alluded to it earlier for the Grill in the Ville and how big of an event that is for Florida now. And it will be happening in June because July is a complete dead period now.
Yeah, no. So that's the thing, too. So even when they had it, it's interesting. I know Florida initially wanted to do it this upcoming weekend because you had guys like Heatsy Kent, one of the top tight ends in the country, a guy who could play offensive tackle, James Johnson, one of their top overall targets, a D lineman. You had some big-name guys scheduled to come in next weekend, but we noticed the list wasn't filling up too much. So, we spoke to a few sources, and, they decided, hey, we're going to bump this back to June because right now Florida has OV weekends for May 31st, June 6th through the 8th, and then the third weekend, June, and then that June 20th weekend, no one's scheduled for OVs as far as Florida. They usually sit with those three. That weekend, that fourth one is when they're going to bring some kids in for the Grill in the Ville. So I think it's a good time. Like you said, it's right kind of in the mix because Florida might get there's a lot of kids coming in May 31st. So after that, some of these kids are going to be going to other schools. And we always talk about last impression, who's fresh in your mind as far as that school who just hosted you. So this gives them an opportunity to kind of swoop back in and kind of get more in their heads again, saying, hey, we might have had a bunch of kids come on May 31st. We made a good impression, but some of these kids maybe go to Oklahoma, the Georgias, the weekends after that. So if you can get some of those guys back after they visit those other schools, that's significant, especially for the ones that are going to decide this summer. So I think overall it was a good plan. I think if it would have been this upcoming weekend too, I think it would have obviously you probably could have had a lot of success, but I think the timing of it, I think from a strategic point, I think it's very smart by Florida. And I think overall, you've looked from years past, it's always a stacked event, no matter who. There's always flip targets there. And I think obviously Florida really, they're already setting that date up, trying to reserve dates with these kids like a month and a half ahead of time. So I think it's going to be significant. I think that kind of goes back to what we're talking about, Dave, as far as like the commitment list. That's a good opportunity before the season to really kind of build this class. So I'm definitely on board with that.
Yeah, and the Grill in the Ville thing is, that's certainly a bigger event now than Friday Night Lights is. Friday Night Lights is not the event it used to be. It is certainly more of a future cast for recruiting. It always had that element, but when it first kicked off and in early stages, it also meant a lot for the current class, and it just doesn't seem like it means that much anymore.
And I think, too, just you have a lot of kids that don't want to get hurt before the season. You have a lot of high school coaches who are kind of like, hey, that's the kind of around the time we're doing a summer camp. You have a lot of these skilled guys who are really performing. I remember when I was in the swamp and Jerry Jeudy was there. Ooh. And I had a video that went viral that when he broke – I forgot which kid it was, but he broke the kid's ankles.
Yeah.
And it was great. It was so competitive. And it goes back to what you said, man, like 8 years ago, you would have guys in the swamp that are top kids competing. It was hype. It was fun. And then as the years went on, I think Florida and some of these other programs noticed that, hey, it's kind of watered down. You would have a lot of underclassmen. Like if they had this year, you probably would have top 2027 kids, 28 kids competing. But also Florida has their 7-on-7 camp. So I think they see enough with getting kids on campus. But I just think that close to the season and NIL and all this, as far as not wanting to get hurt, it makes sense. And I think Florida, the way they pivoted, it made this more of a cookout, more of a family-like environment. As far as just kind of letting kids kick back, because you talk to kids in years past, they're like, hey, we don't really talk about recruiting at this event. It's more just bonding with the coaches, having our parents there, having some good food. And sometimes kids want that. They're so bogged down by recruiting and, hey, you can come here and start day one, where a lot of these kids are like, man, I hear it every day. Let me just relax and, hang out with the staff. So I think it's a good move.
Good stuff. Hey, Cory, recent news, of course, last week, decommitment Devin Jackson. Did that come as a surprise to you? Of course, there's been some coaching changes in the secondary. And then you had the late addition to the 25 class with Javari Flower. So did any of those angles come into play here? And is, I guess, maybe still a chance he ends up in the class?
Yeah, so I know. So, I found out the day before, because he reached out to On3 saying he was going to do it. He was supposed to do it around noon the day before. So here I am, obviously. Dave, you're a dad, so you know how it is. You're working on your schedule. I have my laptop in my car. I'm refreshing everything. I have them on Instagram notifications. So we knew it was coming. But like I said, it was kind of a surprise, though, because Florida, from what we know, Florida still wants him in the class. They're still going to recruit him hard. This is a guy that visited probably 10 or so times before he committed. He was there so much. Even when Corey Raymond was there, he was almost like an unofficial commit. And I put in an RPM prediction almost, man, like a year and a half ago. I was like, man, there's no way this kid doesn't end up at Florida. They want him. He visits every weekend. So that happened. And then, coincidentally, now On3 came out with their new rankings. This was going to happen already, so I don't want Florida fans to think this, but he blew up in the rankings. I think it's like a top 150 overall player because a few weeks ago, On3 had a chance to put eyes on him at camp and were really impressed. So obviously, he's a talented kid, went up in the rankings. He has a chance to kind of climb even more. So we'll see. Florida really wants him in the class, but he's always kind of said, hey, I'm going to take OV. We took an unofficial in Nebraska early in the spring, had a good time. Miami recently offered. But he said all along, hey, I'm going to take a bunch of OVs. I thought he would take him as a Florida commit, but, he wanted to take a step back, man. I mean, it's nothing too foreign, in today's recruiting. We see it so much. Obviously, like you said, Jalen Waters. So, I mean, it's just part of the game nowadays, but Florida is going to keep recruiting him. He has an OV set for June. We'll see if he ends up taking that, especially with his recruitment being reopened. A lot of other schools, LSU's in the mix too. But, we found out about the day before. I was surprised to a degree, but Florida's going to keep recruiting him.
So you mentioned Corey, Jalen Waters, now, of course, Devin Jackson as well. Where's Florida looking at corner now, you think? I mean, of course, with Jackson still in the fold, as you said.
I think
not in the fold, but maybe.
No, I got you. Yeah. I think CJ Brunner, a guy at Windermere, 4-star guy, speedy Nebraska commit, who I think Florida's getting a lot of traction with right now. Justice Fitzpatrick, that's a guy with St. Thomas Aquinas, a guy that Florida really likes quite a bit. I think overall, when you look at CJ Brunner, he's a state champion, obviously in the 100-meter, really fast kid, height and speed type of guy, a guy that has a high ceiling. His brother plays at Eastern Michigan. This guy had, I think, 6 interceptions last year. Like I said, fast in the 100-meter, good character, a guy that's really soaring on Florida's board right now. Penn State, Florida State, and Florida are the 3 main schools pushing hard to flip them. All 3 will host them for OVs. The vibe I'm getting that Florida might have the best shot at flipping him right now. I know they offered early this spring. They've gotten on campus twice. He even scheduled an OV before he even got on the Florida's campus for his first unofficial, which to me shows a lot about where his interest is. It's obviously closer to home. Nebraska got on him pretty early, though, which they do with a lot of kids in Florida. They're great at evaluating a lot of these kids, so those relationships are strong. But I think Florida, he's a kid, I think, who can really rise in the rankings even more. He's kind of a mid to high 4-star, but kind of has that star potential, man. I mean, I think that's a guy Florida can get. Justice Fitzpatrick, he's a kid at St. Thomas Aquinas, like I said, a really talented kid. Really likes Deron Wilson, the new DB's coach at Florida. Everything's been moving pretty well there. The problem is his OV's already set for June. He's told me that Florida's definitely going to get an OV from them. Him and his family really loved their Coach Wilson's presentation in Gainesville. As of right now, if I'm not mistaken, he's the number 1 ranked cornerback in the state of Florida. So he's a big-time kid. One other one worth mentioning, too, is C.J. Hester. I think he's probably the most likely right now out of Coco. We put in an RPM. I think Blake and I both did. We both put one in last week. A guy that Florida really likes. Even back when Will Harris was here, it's a guy, B.A. Rasul, too. They offered him right before the Texas A&M game. Got on campus that same weekend. Florida was his leader at different times, his recruitment. But obviously, once the coaching changes happened, he took a step back, kind of reevaluate everything. And now Florida's back on top again. And I think one thing, Dave, that he said to me was, hey, I can commit to Florida right now without taking an OV. That shows how comfortable he is. So, he's been kind of around a top 100 overall player, maybe just outside the rankings with On3, but definitely a high major kid. I think, Florida's in a really good spot for. I think he's most likely right now. And then, while we're here, Chauncey Kennan out of Sarasota Booker. A lot of work to do there, but he said Florida's going to get an OV after him getting back to campus last week. So a lot of options at cornerback, but I think right now all eyes are definitely on C.J. Hester at Coco.
And I'm glad you brought him up. That'll start us because there's been some good news. You guys have put a lot of predictions in, and he's one of them, as you mentioned, from you and Blake. And I guess the interesting angle for him is, look, if you look at his recruiting profile, you might see safety. Yeah. and I think it should be clear that I'm believing that you guys are saying, and it's been reported, he's playing corner or being recruited at Florida as a corner, right?
Yep, yeah. So Florida likes him at corner. I know Georgia, Texas, Auburn, a lot of other big schools have offered. So he's a guy that's kind of on the rise. And a lot of schools like him kind of as that mid-sized, bigger corner. So, like, he's a guy who could play all over the secondary. When you watch his film, you probably think he plays star a little bit as well. I mean, he's a guy very versatile, good character, but no, 100%, Dave, they like him at cornerback. And I think right now you got to look at Syracuse as probably his top competition. I think a lot of people a few years ago have been like Syracuse, but we all know Fran Brown's staff, they've been recruiting really well. Yeah. That's another kid that shows how important it is to get on these kids early. They got on him before almost anyone did. So they've been persistent. And I think what's going to help here is Florida's proximity. You know, he was there for the first spring practice OV set. You know, right now, Georgia and Texas could get OVs too. We all know with NIL and, you know, obviously those are high major programs. Stuff could always change. But I think right now you got to look at Florida, then Syracuse possibly at number 2.
While we're on Syracuse, I didn't have I remember now, since you said Syracuse, and this is the next place I was going to go, Izayia Williams. Of course, he's in Florida's class right now. He's a current commit, but we know he's been committed to other schools before already. But as you brought up Syracuse. He had been committed to Syracuse. He's now committed to Florida, one of the top linebackers in the country. Well, another prediction for another top linebacker has come in from you guys, 4-star Malik Morris. What's the lowdown on him, Corey?
Yeah, no, I still like where Florida stands, man. I think for several months now, they've been making a top priority. You know, Robert Bala, the new linebackers coach, Ron Roberts, Billy Napier, and we all know about the Lakeland, the Gainesville connection. So I think, there's Florida checks a lot of boxes for him, but also this is a kid that's really intrigued by the SEC. He's called it, the most NFL ready type of conference, a conference that can get him ready for the next level. So Florida, I mean, he's a guy has said from day one, hey, I want to take my OVs. I want to kind of compare all these schools. But Florida has been the overwhelming favorite for a while now. But Miami has gained some ground. They actually we're talking about the Grill in the Ville. Miami has like their pool party. That's like their version. They have like a pool party type recruiting event, which they always get top kids there. I think for them too, it used to be in the summer. They moved up to the spring. But Miami kind of gained some ground after hosting him that weekend. So I think right now it's Florida, then Miami, and then probably Texas A&M at number 3. But Florida, yeah, like I said, he told us when he visited in the spring, there's just something special about Florida. He gets a different feeling from them. And I was told by a few people, about a few months ago that he was pretty close to making commitment. Like he's been close to kind of announcing for Florida. But now that he didn't as of now, and OVs are coming up, you would think he's going to take these OVs first and then decide. But yeah, man, I mean, if you get him in the fold to go with Izayia Williams, who's on 3's number 1 ranked linebacker, and understandably so, the kid's very talented. I mean, that would give Florida arguably the top linebacker class in the country. And you kind of look at how the linebacker room is now, and then you add 2 more studs to that room for the future. It's looking pretty good. So, I think right now Malik Morris, when you look at linebacker, he's probably the guy that you got to really push for right now.
Yeah, we talked about that room and the recruiting that has been there since Billy Napier's come to Florida. That would certainly continue in that way if those two guys end up in the class together. So, Corey, let's get to the trenches here. Let's go to some offensive line talk. There's been a recent prediction for IMG's 3-star offensive lineman, and you may have to help me with this. Is it Navre Carr?
Believe it or not, I think it's Janari Carr.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. Do you know what's so funny about that? Do you know what saved us on that? His voicemail. So when you call his voicemail, there's one time I called him, Dave, and I was like, I don't want him to pick up because I keep forgetting how to say his name. And I was like, I hope he doesn't pick up and calls me back. And then it was like, hey, you reached a voicemail of Janari Carr. Then I had to call Keith because I was going on another show. I'm like, hey, man, you got to help. I can't remember. I can never remember it. So I have to write in parentheses whenever I talk about him because it slips my mind. But no, for sure, man. I think with him right now, I mean, IMG, you have Brock Colje, you have Kine Pepe, you have a lot of guys at IMG, a lot of guys in the offensive line that Florida's after. But I think Janari Carr, obviously, he's the most realistic. He's a Ocala native. His mom grew up. Obviously, she loves the program. Understandably so. They're about their hometown, 30 minutes away from Gainesville. Florida got him very early, offered him as a freshman. So I think early on, you got to look, I've always thought Florida was in the driver's seat. He's a kid that you talk to him, in person, he doesn't want to give away too much. It's almost, he sees the Florida Gators reporters. He kind of knows like, hey man, like they're almost going to push me to say like, hey, Florida's my leader. But no, he's a guy, Tennessee just recently hosted him, made a big impression. You got Miami in the mix, South Carolina, a lot of big schools after him. But I think when it all comes down to it, Florida's done an outstanding job of recruiting him. They've been involved from day one. They've been really in pursuit. And I just think, there's something different, in your heart when you grew up in Ocala, you go back to Gainesville. It's just that home-like feel you get. So I think that's another kid when we talk about OVs. It's going to be a pretty thick OV schedule for him. But I think when it all comes down to it, I think you got to look at Florida as probably the front runner for him for sure. I mean, it's not going to be easy, but I'm with Blake on that. I know he put in a prediction. I'm definitely favoring Florida for Carr.
And we'll stay in the trenches too. Other 3 stars: Javari Lucas, Chancellor Campbell. I know Campbell. You guys had an update today and and seems like some favorable thoughts on liking Florida.
Yeah, man. So this is another guy. I put in a prediction for him last August, and it was because Florida got on him early. He named Florida as leader. It would always tell me Florida's my best relationship. And when I spoke to him this week, he said, "Hey, man, it's Florida, Penn State, Miami, and Ohio State." He told me Florida and Ohio State are recruiting the hardest. And then he said all 4 of those schools are kind of even, but Florida is a little bit above them. So Florida, has the early advantage going into OVs. They've probably been the most consistent. Like I said, I felt good last summer when I put in a prediction for him. I still feel good about that. It's just, I think he's a very high academic kid. So I know when he went to Florida the first time, he was really blown away by the academics that Florida can offer. So that was a big thing. And he also loves, this is a kid, man, that's about 6'8", 290 pounds. And not one of those kids that's really 6'6", that says they're 6'8". When he went to Under Armour camp, he tested off the charts, man. It was legit 6'8", 290. I think he ran like a 5'1" for a 40 for a high school kid that big. So guy with not much fat on him, a real, a guy you have to kind of be patient with, but if he fills out even more and more, and we all know with Rob Sale and them, the way they can develop, a guy that has a sky high potential at left tackle. But that's one of the main things with him. He knows that, at Florida, if he did go there, obviously several offensive line coaches. You have the 2 main ones, but Caleb Johnson, some other guys, he's always going to get work. And one guy he pointed to was Bryce Lovett. He said, "Hey, man, when he went on his visit, they showed Bryce Lovett's film in high school to now, and he's like, man, this guy is not even the same guy. He's so much better." And obviously, we could talk Jake Slaughter for days. Obviously, he's another guy that was like a 3-star. So the proof is in the pudding with Florida's O-line development, and that's something he sees. And I think it's kind of an intriguing sign, too, when you see Ohio State, a school, obviously, that in years past, you see them get involved. You kind of got to hold your breath like, hey, can we hold on type thing. But, having Florida and Ohio State being the schools recruiting the hardest, when Ohio State clearly looking at him as a take, this is a really talented player. But, yeah, OVs, those are the top 4 right now. But, yeah, Florida has the advantage heading into that for sure, into that official visit slate, I should say.
And one more note on Javari Lucas, Corey. I know there's some favorable thoughts for him as well.
Yeah, so Kelvin and Fred Taylor are his cousins. So this is a guy that Florida wanted to see more in the spring. A guy out of Belle Glade, they offered him back in January. Was supposed to get on campus then. He didn't make it, but he obviously was on campus this spring. And then right after that, named Florida his leader. So a guy that has a good upside. I think the other thing is, too, kids can set a lot of OVs, but Florida's pretty selective. If it's a guy that they're going to wait on, they're not going to get an OV set right away. And I think just them offering an OV to Lucas shows that they're pretty serious about him. So he's obviously going to be coming down. Obviously, I think May 30th. So he's going to be coming down for that. And obviously, Fred and Kelvin Taylor, they're in his ear. They want him to be a Gator. I think right now, USF is the other OV schedule right now. But you have Penn State, West Virginia, Miami offered him early on. So you have a lot of high major schools that are involved with him. And I just think overall, when you kind of look at his body of work, you remember Florida's going to take 5 linemen this cycle. That's the plan. So not every kid you're going to get that 4 or 5-star guy. They're in the mix for a lot of other guys. One other one we could probably mention too, Dave, too, is Javion Cooper, another Syracuse 4-star kid that, set an OV, announced that today. Really good frame. A guy that, when I watched him in an Under Armour camp in Orlando, moved his feet very well. A guy that you could just tell is only going to get better and better on the collegiate level. His mom was offered a scholarship for basketball back in the day, and his grandfather likes Florida. So there's some connections there, some familiarity with Florida. And when we spoke to him earlier this year, he said, I love Syracuse. I'm a strong commit, but Florida probably has the best chance at flipping me. And then interest kind of like you didn't hear much about it. He was visiting other schools, and then again, he set the OV today, and we're like, man, there he is again. Because he wasn't responding to many interviews in recent months, which made you think, Florida, they liked him, but they weren't too serious about him. But obviously, they've turned up the heat again. So he's another one I think we definitely have to monitor. Another one coming in on I think it's May 30th. So, a lot of guys, 5-0 linemen this cycle, and Florida, is right there near the top for several of them.
Good deal, good deal. Corey Bender, Gators Online. We got a couple more thoughts right here before we sign off on this episode of Gators Breakdown. We'll go back to IMG, and Corey, there's another name you might have to help me with. Kaku Mua?
Dude, that was awesome. Kaku Mua. Yeah,
there we go. All right.
Yeah. No, I mean, like I said, they make us work with these names.
they really do. They really do. He's
received. I think IMG has like the all name team for this. And then you have Kenai Pepe too. Like there's a few of them there, really tongue twisters.
Hey, it makes sense though. I mean, guys are coming from everywhere to go play there, so it makes sense, I guess.
Well, Dave, have you they have an international team too. They have another team because we went to their media day and then we were talking to all like the main Javari Carr and these guys, and then a whole nother squad came in. O-line was bigger than the other team, the main team. You had kids from the Samoan Islands. There was one kid from Australia, from Perth, and I was talking UFC with them because I forgot what UFC fighter it was. But like I was talking, and this kid was talking. Oh my, they had a whole international team. So yeah, but no, I think right now Kaku Mua, Florida, I feel good about. I put an RPM prediction for him. A guy that Florida offered in December, they've hosted him 4 times since then, has an OV set for this summer. And, Russ Callaway, he's been the one spearheading this recruitment.
Yeah, if we should mention a tight end here. Yep.
Yeah, tight end, yep. And a guy that more of a run blocking tight end at this stage, but a guy that's getting better and better. Really good frame, too. He's a decent athlete, so I think he's a guy with a good amount of untapped potential. Very mature kid, too. I think, too, when he visits schools, I think a lot of schools are impressed with his maturity. I think he's kind of beyond his years as far as that. But I think right now, Florida and Washington, those are the schools I'm monitoring the most. He's told me in recent months that those are his best relationships. But I think him getting back for the spring game was a big deal. And I said, what was the highlight today? And he goes, first touchdown, Hayden Hansen. And that was the thing he loved. And, the relationship with Russ Callaway is good as it gets.
And he's been on campus a lot this last few months.
Yeah. So he even in December, he got offered in December and visited like a week later. So yeah, it's a guy Florida's been in on for a while, and Florida's in the mix for a lot of tight ends. You have Caden Prothero out of Georgia too, a big name kid. We mentioned Heezy Ken at the top of the show. So Florida's in the mix for a lot of these kids. Camden Jensen from Colorado, 6'7" kid that said Florida's his leader, but. Amawa at IMG, I think he's one guy I know for sure Russ Callaway likes quite a bit, and they're pushing hard for. He's kind of said, hey, I'm going to take it at my own pace. I'm going to take these visits. But I think right now you have to look at Florida as the leader in the clubhouse, and that's why I submitted an RPM for him.
All right, Corey, let's stay at tight end. You brought him up a couple times. Heezy Kent from Brunswick, Georgia, so not far. Any new intel there? Is it's a battle of big boys here for Kent, and then just a bunch of big name schools on the tight end from Brunswick.
Yeah, man. So it's Florida, Miami, Texas, Alabama, Georgia Tech. I'm probably missing one more, but I know right now for several months, Florida and Miami have been buzzing the most. It's another prospect that Florida has hosted a number of times, and you got to remember too, for last cycle when the 25 class was in the spotlight, we're still tracking these 26 kids when they're juniors, but obviously we're focused on the seniors. But he was a guy that was constantly on these visitors lists, and we're like, man, even though he has a long way to go as far as when he graduates, it's a guy that we got to keep monitoring. And here he is now in the spotlight, and understandably so. Another guy, it's interesting, man. He has production at tight end, a lot of production if you look at his stats from last year. But right now he's almost 290 pounds. I mean, he's a big kid. So there's going to be some options. Is he going to be a tight end to the next level? Is he going to play tackle? A lot of these recruiting services, including On3, now haven't ranked as a tackle because just where his body might be a few years from now. But I know the kid wants to play tight end. He actually hit me up when the rankings came out. He's like, man, why am I offensive tackle? I'm a tight end. Can you reach out to someone? So he's one of those kids that's like, man, I'm a tight end. And Florida feels that way as well. But I think when you get these kids on campus, you just kind of let it work itself out. We'll see where their body is at the time. But I think right now, Florida and Miami, those are the schools buzzing the most. I definitely I think it's too close to call right now as far as putting in prediction. But Florida, I feel good about. Texas is kind of the dark horse here. I know, with Texas, obviously they're a school they got in a little bit after Florida and Miami, but they've obviously been on his mind. He said OV. He has an OV. He has a commitment date set for this summer, but with 6 OV set, it can kind of go each way. There's going to be probably some drama along the way. It's not going to be easy. A lot of schools are going to be rolling out the red carpet for him. But as it stands today, Florida's probably the school he's most familiar with and the school he's visited the most. And they always say track the visits and recruiting. And I think that's a big reason why Florida's in a good spot for him.
Good deal, good deal. So another recent prediction and maybe another name you have to help me with, Corey. 4-star defensive lineman Valden Son?
Yeah, man. So this is one of those ones you just call him on the phone. You just say, "What's up, big dog?"
There you go.
Yeah. But that's funny.
Yeah, and we got to say we got to say why. He attends high school in Virginia, but he originally comes from Sweden.
Yeah.
So yeah, there you go.
I think it's Sone. I haven't had to call him by his last name much, but yeah, no. I think either way, man, whatever. We're talking. Everyone knows what the hell we're talking about. No, but I think overall, I know Florida feels really good about him. They visited him yesterday at school. Coach Gerald Chapman did. Another kid, about 5-6 times he's been on campus. He was just there for the spring game. Man, a physically imposing kid, though, too. A guy that looks like he's already on the college roster, a big kid. And I think right now the main schools, Florida, Nebraska, Oklahoma. From what I've spoke to a few people within the industry, I know some other schools think Florida's in the driver's seat there. Again, track to visits. I think that's a big reason why. Billy Napier's been involved too. I think every time he visits, there's always the hospitality is always on point with them. And I think Florida, obviously their success or obviously their involvement, I should say, with international players, that's something as well. One of the guys that runs this recruitment and handles it, he's had other guys in the past, go to Florida, obviously from the international connection. So there's a lot of familiarity there. And I think obviously with how Florida's treating them, with how hard they're recruiting them, Gerald Chapman, I know it's a guy near the very top of his wish list. I think right now probably Florida and Oklahoma are probably in the best spot. But if he was committing this week, I'd be rolling with Florida for sure. And I think understandably so. I mean, it's just one. I think Florida just checks a lot of boxes for him.
Good deal, good deal. All right, let's zoom out a little bit, Corey. Let's look a little bit big picture. What do you like that's trending in this class, and what might be the biggest concern as we get to the busy time of this class?
You have to start with linebacker, right? I just think you have the number one linebacker committed. We have Malik Morris. I mean, there's other guys. DQ Forkpaw. God, another tongue twister at IMG. God, man, they're really playing this to test. So he's another guy Florida's really in pursuit for. He has an OV set. So I think you have some good options at linebacker. That's kind of trending in the right direction. I think offensive line with Janari Carr, and obviously Chancellor Campbell, I think you have a chance to have a pretty solid class. I mean, you're going to sign 5. So I think overall, I think that's a pretty solid. It's trending in the right direction. I mean, there's room to make up with a few guys. Felix Ojo, Florida. DeCosta was in the team earlier this week. He has OV set for mid-May, which like we talked about before with OVs. They typically don't do it that much. I mean, he's a different type of dude, 5-star. So that's why they're kind of willing to bring him in whenever the kid's schedule's opened up, and that's mid-May. So I think O-line's trending in the right direction. As far as what's not, running backs a weird position. You have a lot of youth on the roster, but there's not that one clear guy right now. That's kind of saying, I think he's going to be a Gator. I think Florida's kind of in the middle of the pack for a lot of these guys. Javari Barnett was one at Tampa Bay Technical that Florida was in on pretty early. He committed to Illinois. That kind of came. I know he had an OV set there, but and they've been kind of on the upswing in recent years with Brett Buell, coaching them up. But he was one for a while that we thought he was most likely. And Jabar Jaloop was recruiting him fairly hard. He still has an OV set with Alabama, so he's a talented kid. We'll see what happens there, but I think running back's the one right now because you had Javion Mallory, a kid that Florida really liked, but he just committed to Miami. I think that's the one, the biggest concern, and you can't really feel overly good about a lot of them this early. It kind of goes back to the 2 commitments part. I think DB overall they could be doing pretty good. We talk about CJ Hester. I think they're in a good spot for him. Jamian Gordon, the safety out of Alabama, isn't then D line. It's hard. That's a good question, man. I think they're in a good spot at some positions, but not overly in a great spot, if that makes sense. And I think running back is the one right now, and I don't think they really have to push that hard right back. I feel like they have a good amount of youth too, so it's not a position Florida really has to extend itself for. So I think either way they'll be fine. I think it'll be interesting to revisit this after OVs when you and I jump on this again because I think right now 2 commitments, you have to not feel overly confident, but they're trending in the right direction for a lot of kids.
Good deal, good deal. you've probably alluded to this one a little bit, but who could be next to commit? I mean, C.J. Hester might be the one to jump out, but I don't know really what a timeline is. So is there one, I guess, timeline-wise? We've talked about some guys who Florida could feel good about, or, they are trending in the right direction for Florida. But I guess as the timeline goes, who could be maybe the next one to pop?
Yeah, and like you said, that's where it kind of goes back to the OVs. A lot of these kids make you feel good, Malik Morris, a lot of these guys, but then it's like, man, we're already almost getting into May. And
Right.
you would just think, hey, unless something popped open, we're like, hey, we need you to commit. We're going to get another kid, commit now. I just don't see it. I mean, CJ Hester's supposed to commit, I believe, July 1st. So we're still a little ways from him. Maybe he changes it up and feels good about Florida, jumps on board. Jamian Gordon's a kid out of Alabama, depending – if they want to kind of give him the green light. I know it's a guy Florida really likes. He's an OV set for June 6th. Florida's his leader. Even back in the fall, he was saying Florida had the best chance of flipping him. He was a kid committed to Alabama and UCF at different portions of his recruitment. So I think that's a guy that comes to mind. But even Kaku Mua, that was one guy I thought going to the spring game. I know there's a lot of buzz, and someone asked me at Gears Online, is there anyone on this visitors list that you can see committing? And it was him. I just thought, Florida was in a good spot. I think it was visit number 4, IMG connection. I just thought maybe it's going to click this weekend. He pulls the trigger, and he didn't. So I think right now, you got to look at Malik Morris, Kaku Mua, CJ Hester, Jamian Gordon. I don't think Javari Carr is going to commit anytime soon. I think he's going to take those series of OVs that we spoke about. So it's a weird thing, you're right? I mean, it's different than previous years where you have a who could be next to commit, and you have that one guy you can kind of point to right away. But right now, it's kind of a wait and see with a lot. And I think if this was like in maybe March or February, you feel a little bit better about it. But now that we're so close to OVs, one would think that a lot of these kids are just going to wait and take these OVs because we're so close to that month,
Yeah, for sure. 2 more, Corey, and I'll let you go, man. It just came through Gators Breakdown Plus. They knew I was recording this, so and this was a player I wanted to ask about too. Harrison Ford wanted to know Samorian Wingo, of course, right here from my neck of the woods. I'm here in Jacksonville. He's there in St. Augustine. We hadn't really talked wide receiver much this episode, and kind of seems to be the big name that's out there for Florida, especially with commitments going elsewhere that were big targets so far this spring for the Gators.
Yeah, so he just put out top 5, but I think, as we kind of said all along, I think he stays in state. I mean, obviously anything can happen, but Florida, Miami are the 2 schools we're focused on the most with him. A guy is near the very top of Billy Gonzalez's wish list, and even back in January when it was a contact period, it was the first stop for Gonzalez, and I think that was notable. And even the kid say, he goes, I wasn't too surprised. I'm grateful, but I'm not too surprised because our relationship is so strong. He attended almost every home game last year. Even when the 2025 class was in the spotlight, he was saying, man, I talked to Coach Billy all throughout the week. They want me. They said, hey, just let them know when you're ready, when he's ready, and he'll be a Gator. So, I mean, he's been viewed as a take for a long time now. And I think right now with his recruitment, you still got to feel good about where Florida stands. Very comfortable at Florida, was back on campus early this year. I think the main thing we got to look at is that relationship, like we said, with Coach Gonzalez. Coach Napier's involved too. Miami, I think the one thing you got to look at Miami too, he visited Miami early this year in the spring, and it was supposed to be a one-day visit, and he made it a whole weekend. And I think that kind of put Florida on notice that, this isn't going to be, an easy one as far as Florida might be the leader. But, him extending that visit to 3 to 4 days was very notable. And Miami did make up a lot of ground this spring. But, yeah, man, I think you got to look at Florida as having the slight edge over the Hurricanes right now. And I think it all kind of goes back to a relationship, Florida. And we talked about with other guys. We talked about Syracuse with CJ Hester, how they got involved with him early. This is kind of the same case with Florida and Wingo. Florida got in very early with him, and it's all kind of paying off. They offered him last summer after a camp, and it's been persistent ever since.
All right, Corey, last one, man. Thanks for hopping on. A top player that Florida may have a best shot with. There's several targets that we've talked about, and there's a lot in that top 150 range, but we're not really hearing a whole lot about, elites or, top of the class. Now, worth noting, Izayia Williams is ranked 41st overall, so that's a pretty big get already that's in the class. But, anybody above that, any 5 stars, any of the, the big-time, big-name prospects Florida could be in the mix for.
Yeah, I think James Johnson, who's been on three's number one D lineman, who's down at Miami Northwestern now, he's at North Fort Myers. This is a guy that Florida has loved for a while. I know before they even offered him, that was a kid you would hear around the facilities during visit weekends. You would hear coaches talking about him. And Georgia right now is number one, but I think Florida could be number two. I mean, it's another. They've hosted him more than anyone. I think it's going to be interesting now that he's at Miami Northwestern. Maybe Miami moves up a little bit, moves up more with him. But I think, he was on three's number one defensive lineman in the last rankings update, and understandably so. He's a elite guy. He's not a five-star yet, but I think as the rankings expand, as you know, Dave, how more five stars are given throughout the cycle towards the end, he's an elite guy that Florida is very heavy on. Braylon Womack, a safety that Florida really likes as well. Ohio State's in on him. Florida's in the top. Florida right now is in the top four. Ohio State recently pulled the number one. But, he's a guy that had two big visits early this year. It really kind of moved up his list. Vinny Sinceri's playing a huge role in that recruitment. Even when he was at Washington, he recruited him very hard. And that's arguably the number one reason why Florida has surged on his list. I think right now he's five-star number one safety in the country. I think there's obviously some room to make up. But I think after a strong OV, I think Florida could really potentially move into the driver's seat. So I think you look at those two. And I think Jake Krull, obviously an IMG Academy, a guy that's really climbed in the rankings, not a five-star, but a top 50 overall prospect. His father graduated from Florida, a big-time edge prospect who is from Orlando, put up big numbers. I think believes Bishop Moore before he went to IMG, a very productive kid. But the thing with him is he's been very calculated. He said, hey, I'm going to take all these spring visits, which there's a lot of them, and then I'm going to decide who's going to get OVs after that. It would be a major shocker if Florida didn't get one, but he told me back in February that he thinks as far as culture, Florida fits him the best. And, that was his dream school growing up. And when I asked him what's important to him, he said culture. So you got to connect the dots and feel that Florida's in a great spot for him. I'm a very productive edge guy that speaks with Billy Napier and Coach Mike Pearson a number of times throughout the week. So I think those are the main guys. I mean, you can also go to Trenton Henderson, Pensacola Catholic, a guy that, I spoke to him earlier this week, has a top 10, but he said Florida's in that top tier. Not a five-star again, but an elite four-star. A guy could be a five-star by the end of the cycle. A big edge prospect. So I think right now it's tough to tell. I think Braylon Womack, when it comes to star rankings, he's one that comes to mind. But James Johnson, he's the number one D lineman in the country. I think Florida Georgia's on top right now, but I think, there's no other school he's more familiar with than Florida, and I think that says a lot.
There we go. Plenty of time for some moving and shaking in that regard too, Corey. We know how fickle recruiting is, and it's just seems that way ever more so now than it ever has been. So certainly a lot of storylines to follow, guys. If you want even more, Gators Online. You got Corey, you got Blake Alderman, you got Keith Niebuhr. I mean, there's really nowhere else you need to turn for recruiting because those guys have the super team over there at Gators Online. Corey, man, I can't thank you enough right here for giving a breakdown. Of course, right here on Gators Breakdown of Recruiting.
No, thank you. I'm always glad to jump on, Dave. Thanks for having me on.
All right, everybody. Corey Bender, Gators Online. Find him right there, and you can find him out there on social media as well. So that'll do it for this episode of Gators Breakdown. I'm your host, David Waters. You can find me on social media at GatorDave_SEC. Guys and girls out there, thank you for joining us on this episode of Gators Breakdown.